Good morning, everyone. My name is Sandra Miller, and I am your Workforce Development Manager with the Education Foundation of the Washington Hospitality Association. I come to you today because my role here with the Education Foundation is fabulous. I get a chance to work on your behalf, but in my soul, I'm a hotel operator for 26 years. So coming back here today, it's wonderful to spend time with you. I've been in your shoes, and I'm excited to be able to introduce our next speaker to you today because it's an issue that you drove. The Lodging Association back in 2012 said we need to do something about sex trafficking. We, alongside of Dr. Mar Bretman with BEST, law enforcement and victim services providers, said we're going to develop training. The result of that training is BEST. We offer it through the Education Foundation. We also have anti-human trafficking training through the American Hotel Lodging Education Institute through the Education Foundation, as well as the Blue Campaign from Homeland Security. But the issue is actually more broad. Today we're going to be talking about forced labor. We have with us today one of the international leaders in building awareness about the issue. So we are incredibly fortunate that we have her right here in our town, and she actually is from Olympia. So I'm kind of proud about that because that's my hometown too. Rani Hong is a consultant, speaker, and trainer who has helped build a global network of survivors' voices from all forms of human trafficking to help from international decision makers, coalitions, and alliances to inform them about the issues of the anti-trafficking movement. She's here to talk today about a story that is personal, but also a story, unfortunately, that affects thousands. So we're going to have Rani Hong come up. Afterwards, we're going to have a question and answer opportunity with Glen Houseman. He is with Lodging Trends editor at large for Hotel Management magazine. We'll have a question and answer to talk about the issue more in depth. So please help me welcome Ms. Rani Hong.
Well, good morning. Good morning. Thank you. So it's wonderful to be here, look out to all of you. I'm sure you had a great last few days at this event. I'm very excited to see the work back there and to learning more also on what the work of Washington Hospitality Association is. So thank you to both Taryn and Sandra for having me be able to come and speak. So, as we've heard, your association has been very active on this role of prevention of human trafficking. So first of all, I want to congratulate you on the great work you are doing. And today, my goal is to be able to give you a little bit more information, but not just information. My goal is to inspire you into action. So as I go through my presentation, if each of you can see what role can you play as experts in this, in the hospitality industry. So just to start with, I would like to play this video. I think they just pushed the play button. There we go. know, modern slavery is real. Over 150 years after the abolition, more than 40 million people are enslaved. We ask, how is this possible? We know that slavery is a $150 billion business annually. And we know the cost is human rights and human dignity. See, I was a 7-year-old girl living in southern part of India. I was happy living with my mom and dad. And one day, I was taken to another location in southern part of India. And this woman promised my mother, hey, I'm going to help you for a month or so. I just want to help you give food to this child or give her a better education. So as parents, we know that we want what's best for our child. So she allowed me to go down this one house just about a block away. And I went there, and my life started changing. See, this woman was recruiting children off the streets of India. She would get the ownership of a child, and what happened? She sold me to a next state over, where I didn't know the language, I didn't know anyone, everything unfamiliar. I was disoriented. I didn't know what was happening. A 7-year-old child being sold for somebody else's profit. And you see, as I went over the other state, my captors, who got ownership of me, basically a lot of things happened there, lots of abuse, torture and starvation. And with all of that, being held in a cage, I was able to walk as one because my legs had atrophied. And many things happened to me, but because I could no longer work for my owner and labor trafficking, I was no good. They put me as destitute and dying and said this child has no value. However, in human trafficking, the traffickers and the owners want one more profit. So they wanted one more profit, and so they sold me for international adoption from southern India to Canada, and then Canada through the Canadian border that we're close to into Seattle, Washington, Seattle into Olympia. So that was my transit location, my route. And again, 7-year-old child had no idea, just crying for my mother. And she never came to rescue me. I didn't know what was happening to me, except what we do know today is what this 7-year-old child is myself, looking like, you know, everything's been taken out. So they put me as, you know, part of mentally ill. They just put me as just what I wasn't functioning. But the good news, I was adopted by a great woman here from Olympia, Washington, and she changed my life. She fed me breakfast every morning. She gave me love and attention. See, that's all we're asking as human beings. That's all I'm asking for as a 7-year-old child, to be loved and for somebody to take care of me. So as I got into the United States, I just, you know, obviously working a lot with me with the doctors and all. My mother had pulled down my legs to help me to walk properly again. And slowly, she started to help me build my life again. See, ladies and gentlemen, this is what human trafficking is. Putting victims in a state that they cannot function, they don't know anybody, and there was nobody they could ask for help. Sometimes, in my case, language as well, as a barrier. But today, this is why we are here, because we can change that. We can change the lives of many victims in our state, in our city. So that is why I'm here today, to give you a sense of hope that we all can do something about this. So as we work together and as we learn more about this industry and about how human trafficking occurs in our state, but not only in our state, but sometimes on properties that we own or places that we work at. So my goal is today to be able to give you some of the tools to help you advance your work, but also tools. We are also building tools to help protect your brands. So as business owners, we know how important it is to protect our brand. We would not want anything that would taint our credibility or reputation. So as we're working on this issue, we know that human trafficking is selling people for a profit, and part of that with exploitation. So as we work on what is human trafficking, we are working on, again, corporate training that's coming, taking it from my experience as the 7-year-old child. And see, my trafficker, he actually owned a business. He was actually working at a manufacturing company, and he was using children to work for him, underage, unpaid, and with torture and abuse. That is how he made his money. And so today, as I'm working with the business community, I want to be able to share my story, to give the education, but to really see how this kind of works. So we know that we need to, as an industry, as an association, you guys are, as you're being educated, we also want to empower you to be, maybe to help you more to prevent forced labor within the supply chain. So training hotels, restaurants, are all part of what we are bringing to the table. So as some of you know, that you train your employees on fire safety, you train them on health and how to stay safe at the job site. And so I don't see any different than why we should not be adding the education on human trafficking and forced labor, because it's just as prevalent. However, it's a hidden crime, right? So we can't always know who, what, and where, but with the tools and with the education, you'll be able to see some signs, and I'll go into a little bit more. But I think it is important to put this into our business plan or business safety things, and to educate our employees on the signs of human trafficking. And as Sandra said, there are several different material that is here that will help you to be able to get more information on that. So through my life experiences, I've learned the worth and the potential of each person, what it means for ourselves and our global community. We are interconnected, but we are more powerful together. That's it, we is greater than me. One person cannot solve this problem. I've been working on this issue for 18 years, and it seems like it's just sometimes getting more difficult. But realize today, it's not about the one person solving it, it's about a coalition. It's about the association coming along and saying, okay, what can we do to protect our own people and also be a voice? So as we work on this issue, we realize the importance of that. And so for decades, I have been working with and building relationships with powerful people, powerful leaders around the world. In 2011, I was appointed as UN Special Advisor to the Global Initiative to Fight Human Trafficking, because we realized that we needed the experiences of survivors at the table to explain how this works. So I was so proud that the United Nations in 2011 realized this is an important voice. Because up to that point, the voice of survivors were not being heard. And so in 2011, I was appointed as the UN Special Advisor, and in my work, I traveled around the world, educating. And I remember one personal story is that I was asked to speak in Romania, and I knew the details, traveled to, you're staying in a hotel. I didn't know any more details than that, but as I got into the hotel, I realized something doesn't seem right. I went upstairs, and there was a restaurant within the hotel, and at the restaurant, wonderful food, and I was enjoying my meal, and then all of a sudden the waitress came to my table, and I noticed she was a little timid. She didn't really want a conversation, and I wasn't quite sure what was going on. But based on my experience of what I've seen before, I realized, this is something that was hidden, and later found out later that restaurant was being used as a place to bring the victims in. It appeared that they were just working as waitresses, but beneath the surface, they were being exploited, and they weren't getting paid, and they were being abused. So this is a real thing, right? So that's why I want to make sure as we learn the signs, but even for myself, being at a place, didn't know what to expect, but I was able to recognize that, and then from that to take action at the national level. So I tell you that story just to make it to bring it home and to bring it to closer to where places that we may run into victims. So I've worked with His Holiness Pope Francis. I will be actually traveling there next week to work with him on the global scale to educate and then also to bring solutions. So as I work with world leaders from different people, I realize it takes all of us. Yes, it takes a very high level of positions to be able to bring in the global change and national changes. But you know what I realized? It's the people right here in the room and the people right on the ground who really know more of the ins and outs. And you're the ones who are going to have more connection, with on the ground things that are going on. So yes, it's important to include the governments. Again, working with 193 country member states. I just did that like 2 weeks ago. I was speaking at the UN General Assembly to saying, where do we go from today and build the future that we want? And so I went before, in 2013, I went before the UN General Assembly and joined them as part of their Sustainable Development Goals, asked for a goal number 8, which is specifically working on this issue. But I want to focus a little bit also now on what we do hear a lot on sex trafficking, and I'll bring a coalition to that, how that connects. But we also know slavery in supply chains is just as prevalent. Sometimes we don't recognize it, or we don't think of it. But we realize that as we work on this issue, we see it more and more prevalent. So identifying and preventing forced labor in supply chains in the hospitality industry, in other industry, it happens in all industry, right? It's not alone. I have worked with the manufacturing industry. We have great leaders from big name brands who are working on this issue because they realize they have to do it from the corporate level. So the manufacturing industry is really taking active, but what I would like to do as our launch, this is the opportunity we have, is to see how in Washington State, how can we as Washington Hospitality Association bring more on this issue, but not just to bring attention, but to really help bring the tools. So on the global level, we realize that supply chains can be very complex. We know that forced labor is not always something we really want to talk about probably, or even sometimes think about, but we need to, as in this day of age. We heard, even with the tourism industry is really helping to also advance this work. So if a risk of slavery is identified within a supply chain, businesses need to react to how to resolve the situation and prevent it from happening in the future. So the risk is more than just human trafficking and the brand retention, but no law-abiding business can seriously say, that crimes such as forced labor and human trafficking in their operation doesn't exist. We all learned it exists everywhere. We touch it, like at the video, we see it every day in the things that we touch. So we know that, it's more in the supply chains. It may be more, we know that auditors on the ground are able to go into factories and see, and I have seen children work. I even traveled back to India, and I've visited these factories, and I've seen these children, 5 years old, 7 years old, working to make the products that we love. So this is why I feel like we need to also include this issue as on the broader sense of training within human trafficking. I think one of the things, what I was so inspired by, in 2010, I was asked to travel to Egypt, and there was this big event going on when all world leaders came to work on this issue specifically. and what could everybody do? And I remember meeting Marilyn Carlson, the Carlson hotel industry, Carlson Hotels, and listening to her and saying, boy, we need to really get this into our every site, every place that we own. We need to be able to educate. We need to be able to inform and inspire people to take action. So I was inspired as I met her, as you know, they own Carlson's hotels, the Radisson Hotel, TJ Fridays. You probably know many of the brands. That she herself and her company has taken a great leadership. I know some of you may be from Hilton. Hilton has done an incredible job, and you hear a little bit more of what they have done, but saying, yes, this is important. Yes, we need to do something about it. We no longer can stay silent. As you know, with social media, people are posting things and things is going on, so we no longer can be silent. So if we can't be silent, then how do we take a proactive step, right? And in order to take that proactive step, we need the tools to help us. It's not easy. And I'll be the first one to say this issue is not an easy one to do. But the fact that we're addressing it and we're having speakers on it is a huge step forward. Because I remember back at, I think it was, probably 15 years ago when I spoke publicly, people just thought, wow, this doesn't really happen. But today we're seeing this now as a reality. And so I think that's where we have such a significant role to play as, again, the business owners. And then, so in that thing, even the Carlson company made a commitment to prevent. Then it's not saying that we're perfect. We're saying we're making a commitment to get better and to improve and doing everything we can. So labor recruitment, what we know today, we think it's global, and we know there are a lot of recruitments, but there is a whole kind of a trend to going to saying no recruitment fees. These are the big manufacturing companies signing on, saying we're signing a pledge, saying we're making a commitment to even just do one simple thing, and that is not to have recruitment fees. Now, we might say, hey, we don't really do this here in the local level, but what I do want to bring a point is that several years ago, probably 7 years ago, some of you may have heard about the Global Horizon case right here in Washington. These were labor brokers who were recruiting workers from Thailand, brought them from Thailand into Washington State, and then put the workers, especially in the Eastern Washington agricultural locations. And for a while, the business was thriving, and then until they got caught. Well, now today, we know that's one of the biggest. So to fast forward that story, it all went all the way to the court case, and they got the penalties. But that was actually a sort of recruitment fees and how they were bringing over overseas workers into our state and into our agriculture. And so good news is, yes, they got caught and got the penalty. However, that showed us, if that's just one, how many more of these situations could be happening in our state. And I went before Washington State legislation back in 2002-03 and asked for them to create a law and to prevent this, and then to also create a task force. And as a good report, as the Washington State took leadership on this, we became the first state in the country to create such laws and to take proactive steps. So this is why, again, it's important for me to speak here in Washington State, because I live here, right? I'm from here, and it would make me more happy, just as we continue taking this leadership even to the national level, and even to the global level. So again, this is the opportunity that you do, however each one of you may find the role that you can play. So you ask, how can I identify victims? So sometimes we think, what we know what human trafficking is often occurs in the recruitment process, but also many times before the employment begins. So sometimes there's misrepresentation in the contract terms. Again, fees are listed in the contract in certain companies, and then often passports and visas are falsified. So even in my own story as a 7-year-old child, how did they get away with the system, right? And my trafficker was able to get away because he was able to provide false visa and false passport, which got me out of the country. And they put me they just said, this is orphan child, we don't know anything about her, but in reality, they knew everything, right? So often, a victim's identification is withheld from them and kept by the traffickers or their employers. So these are some of the things that we may not see as much. We see it, we don't hear about it, is what I probably should say. It's happening here in our state, but we just don't hear about it, and we're not able to identify it necessarily. But that is one way that how middlemen go and get a vulnerable worker, bring them over here, and then trap them. And also, again, many cases, it doesn't have to be foreign. It's right here within our state. Workers coming from Mexico, or within our state, one coming from, into Seattle and then into Eastern Washington. So there are many ways that that labor brokers and middlemen, employment agencies all work together. And a lot of times they are very well networked as well. So we know that often the labor brokers function as a bridge between the worker and the employer, and then the employee. So again, helping to build this training material that will give them guidance is an important step forward. We also know in many cases that labor brokers, both legitimate and important to connect to finding laborers, sometimes can be challenging, but that's when often things behind the table occurs, which then increases the risk, right, to your brand if things are happening there. So often recruiters sometimes promise individuals high promising job, good benefits, reasonable working conditions, so they will get that employment, and then once they get here, is completely different than what they were told. So that's how human trafficking and how the trapping of the victim actually occurs. So probably more, again, we hear about sex trafficking. It's absolutely is happening here, especially in the big city of Seattle, but all over in all cities. And there is the connection to sex trafficking, because a lot of times, again, what happens is that migrant employers or employees are, again, brought into isolated locations, such as lodging and agriculture camps, and then what happens after their work, then they get transitioned into the sex trafficking or in prostitution. So we know very well this is happening. And again, they have their systems and how they're recruiting. And many times they do as a second part-time job almost after their working hours. They're, again, re-trafficked and reused. So as a story, as an individual, I think when I first started working in Washington State, I wanted to know, okay, how does this happen? What are the routes? Where are they coming from? And somewhere along the line, I met a woman named Alejandra. And I listened to Alejandra, and I listened to her story. And she would tell me she was originally from Colombia, same story, great family, but she was offered a job in Tokyo. So she took the job, and then she went to Tokyo, and then all of a sudden, just right there, recruiters met her at the airport and then brought her into New York City, the big city. She had no idea what was happening. Long story short, there are different people used in the system, and in this case, somebody was telling her what's best for her life is to come to Seattle, Washington. And she didn't know where she was, what was happening, but somebody bought the airline ticket to bring her to SeaTac. And the next thing you know, the traffickers came, picked her up at the SeaTac airport, and then brought her to a local hotel in Olympia. And this is a well-known hotel in Olympia. And that's where the meeting takes place. None of us would know, right? None of us would really think to know that, but this is what's happening. It's unseen, but I would think often if those people at the front desk of the receptions knew what to look for, they could have absolutely helped save this young woman. Long story short, that's where they met, and then he took her to an isolated location, which is further in Olympia, really out of nowhere. So I meet her, I go over there and realize what broke my heart is because she would tell me her connection with people and such, and she goes, well, this is all I have is the squirrels. The squirrels are my friends. That's who I've talked to, because the trafficker went into the city to work all day, kept her in this isolation, and she was deteriorating. We fought about that story, and the next thing I know, as case broke, she was being held in the Tacoma Detention Center, where we look at illegal immigrants. But if we look beneath the story, or beneath that face, there's a story, right? She was helpless, she didn't know what to do, she was being used by the system. And there I go to the Tacoma Detention Center, and I talk with her, and when I first saw her, of course, she had all the detention clothing on, jail-like clothing on, and was treated like a criminal. So I'm here today to tell you that, as for myself, we have come a long way, so we don't want to treat the victim as criminals. We need to see them as those who have been victimized. But that story really brought it to me in my own hometown, in my own state, and that actually inspired me to go before Washington legislation and ask for several more legislation to happen there. So we know that, often, we also know in this, construction work, workers are also being used within that system as well as we're building hotels and restaurants around here. So as members of this association, we'll come back later in a little bit to hear a little bit more what we can do, but this is also a human rights issue, right? We know we can put in policies and things within our human rights to watch out for these signs. So collaboration. Collaboration is everything. And then we know this is not an easy task. Nobody would say it's easy. It takes time. It's process. And so I encourage you today, there is no such thing as small change, but it does take even financial resources to help shelters. We have somebody here in the room that actually, Nancy, I'm not sure where you are, Dr. Nancy, who runs a shelter here locally in the Seattle area. And so anything, if you as a hotel chain want to help empower victims, give job training, empowerment programs, I do a lot of that with my foundation. My husband and I also run a Ronnie Foundation, which helps reintegrate victims back into society. And just by the way, so my husband is also a victim of child trafficking. I won't go into his story. You could go and watch the Oprah Winfrey video. She's done a great video on the two stories put together. But as the two of us, and probably not the place to tell you about the story here, but basically we met on a blind date. So hopefully it's okay to say here in the business meeting, but we met on a blind date, not knowing each other's story. And then slowly we obviously, discussed more after marriage. And so, but as he has a very strong story as well, and then together we created the Ronnie Foundation in 2006, and now travel to 22 countries, equipping and training and educating the public on this. So how do we, in fact, can I just have, who has been trained on the basic here of human trafficking? Your employees, who has actually been trained or you train your employees? Okay, good, so there's a good handful. And I think for you guys to be able to share the best practices, what works and what doesn't work, would be a very good feedback into association, and maybe you already have that. But putting that together, because what we want to do is be able to pilot a program here, be strong in it, and then be able to take it nationally. And those are, sometimes I work with the US government, done campaigns on that as well. So as we train the staff on how to safeguard against the risks of modern day slavery in our facilities, employment practices, we know that, again, the staff has a huge role in detection of modern day slavery. The signs to look for is, again, is there an adult person with maybe a minor who appear to be very secretive as a receptionist, and they're checking in, they're not wanting to give much information. The other minor doesn't talk much, possibly they have no identification. You would start questioning that, right? So these are some of the signs you can start looking for as a potential risk. Also behaviors, a lot of times the traffickers are very sometimes nervous that they're going to be caught. But again, looking for anything that would give a sign that something is not right, then saying something about it. Often we'll see them also controlling the victim. So in my case, I mean, my broker, again, I was 7 years old, but my broker controlled me, right? Basically, he controlled me to submit to the will of my master. We call it term seasoning for submission, right? How do you get a child to submit to the master? And the way he got control of me, more or less, is to hold me captive in a cage that's pretty small. And then trapping, obviously, and then getting to the child that you break the will of that child. So for me, I was broken that at the end of the day, I wasn't talking. I had a very difficult time in communications. And in that state of mind, I became very dysfunctional. But the way they trap you so I would obey the will was basically more abuse and torture. But that puts, especially in a child who's in development age, brain development and everything else, it all affects us, right? It affects us even into our adult life. So it's not just how it affects the victim at the time that they're victimized, it is something that actually is carried through the victim's life into adulthood with many challenges, right? And so we, as former victims, overcome a lot of challenges. I've overcome a lot of my challenges, but it wasn't easy. And I say, why would any of us need to go through that? But this, again, is where you come in and you can rescue, you can restore, and you can reintegrate the victims, and giving opportunity to victims to actually be part of the solution as well. So again, other signs that you can look for, the other signs that you can look for is are they paying with cash? So today, now traffickers will come to the reception and say, hey, I want to pay in cash. No questions asked here. I don't know what the rules and regulations you might have in place, but that should be a red flag. Okay, why? And especially if they have another person with them. Okay, that should be a red flag. And now today with technology, one of the things that I am doing on the global level is creating technology platform. So we're going to be able to give you technology tools to be able to help monitor the supply chains, to monitor and to, won't go into details of it, but the tools, so software tools that's able to help give you information and start looking at patterns of potential how human trafficking is worked. So that is in work right now as we're launching it nationally and globally. But that will also be a tool to help you to advance on this. So again, I think you probably may have heard a lot of the statistics. Polaris Project, I'm not sure if the information's back there, but great job. Identifying workers. So I won't go into the different statistics that's there, but there again. So I realize as I've been speaking on this issue that we have numbers. In fact, at the UN General Assembly, I was with International Labor Organization that gave some of this information. And we know there are 40 million slaves in the world today, but I don't want you just to see this big number. I want you to see the individual person, the name. I have a name, I have a face. I'm like your kids, or I'm parents, right? I have kids of my own. We're humans, we're people, just like you, but we were looking for freedom, and we're looking for people who will be on our team, more or less, to prevent this from this happening. So oftentimes that, sometimes victims will feel alone, and especially not nobody's helping them. But these are things that we're changing in here. What I do want to tell you is now we are more educated, and of course there's a lot more training. In the more detailed training, we go specifically in much more detail. But here's another leadership, and again, I think several of you are taking leadership in this area. Be a good way to track that and to let the public know what, again, the leadership here. But here's one that I have worked with. This is an overseas UK hotel. But so basically, this hotel here is owned, the Hilton, the Hamptons, Best Western, Ramada, Holiday Inn. All of these hotels are leading and taking preventive steps. So as you join this movement, you're part of that, more of the coalition who are actively taking part. And this is going to show, from the outside, it just looks like a regular hotel. But they are proactively very much working against, prevent this crime from happening. So the other one, I don't know if any of you are from Marriott. Marriott has done an incredible job of being able to have commitments in place, prohibiting suppliers from using unethical labor. Other corporations, again, they've also joined the no fees, recruitment fees pledge. You know, they see when there's a risk, and when there's a risk, and then what do we do? So they're another example of what can happen. I know somebody was being interviewed today just on their leadership. I won't say who that was, but someone in this room was also being able to show their leadership in this. So again, in codes of conduct, we have the human rights, resource policies. I ask you today, how can you start taking the leadership? What can you do today? And specifically, as we'll have a question and answer time to be able to give you more information on it. But basically, the private sector has a major role, right? Every one of you have a major role. I myself have a role in what I can do. But there are many, many measures that you as a business can do to mitigate the risk of human trafficking occurring in your facility, in your restaurant, any of the places you may come across. Again, we talked about some of the stuff. Working with NGOs, the local NGOs usually are very educated on what's going on. So one of the things that I do want to tell you about is that together with my husband, the two of us were being, I was 7 years old, he was being 9 years old, both trapped in this industry called child trafficking, and we were trapped and had no freedom. So now today as an adult, I am launching this thing called a Freedom Seal. And basically we wanted a symbol out in the world to show the people freedom can occur, and we wanted something to symbolize our freedom, but not only our freedom, but how organizations can apply for the Freedom Seal. Basically, the Freedom Seal has three easy steps. So if you as a company want to take proactive step, one is make a commitment to ending slavery. We are seeing many more CEOs standing up and saying, yes, we have a problem, as we all do on this issue. However, I don't just sit there, I'm moving forward and I'm taking proactive steps. So the Freedom Seal is an actual criteria. We give you very specific criteria, many of the things that I mentioned, putting in policies, helping trafficking victims, and then looking at your own supply chain. If you do those three things, we help guide you. And at the end of the day, if you can show to us as a third party that certification that you're doing the things to prevent it, then you can earn this Freedom Seal. His Holiness Pope Francis has endorsed the seal, so we are rolling it out globally. But what would make me more happy is, of course, being right here in our state. So I think there are discussions here, how can we roll this out in Washington State? And then how can we reward those who are showing with evidence the proactive steps? So I think as we work together in the next, I know you guys had an awards night last night, that'd be maybe one way. Next year, awards night, let's highlight those who are actively taking part. So you have a whole year to be able to do things. We're here to help you, to give you the tools. But this Freedom Seal is a new symbol that is being out in the marketplace as a symbol of freedom. It is a bold statement as businesses and organizations that we are collectively committed to creating supply chains, prevention of forced labor within supply chains. And we know that this change seems impossible, and it is big, it is complex, but that is why I say the Freedom Seal is a process. It's not something you just do overnight, but it's a process in the right direction. And we're here to educate, provide assurance, and work towards our shared common goal. So again, creating a Washington State specific campaign are the things that we're looking at. Freedom Seal has principles, which is your guidelines. It's in alignment with the United Nations Global Compact, international labor organizations. So our principles and our guidelines are in alignment with that. This is just the outward facing symbol to able to show the public your commitment. So today, we can stand here and sit here and say, okay, great presentation, let's move on, let's go on, or we can stop and do something about it. And of course, my ask is today, to join myself, the Ronnie Foundation. If you need training, come and see us. If you need tools to help you monitor your supply chain, which will ultimately lead to protecting your brand, we have those tools as well. If you can work with the association as you really come together as a coalition, as a network, share your best practices because we need to know what works and what doesn't, right? We could spend our days spinning our wheels and trying all these things, and at the end of the day, if it's not working, we need to shift gears and do something else, right? And this is one of the reasons I saw many things when it wasn't working, so this is one of the things, the Freedom Seal is one solution I'm bringing to the world as a tangible action. Again, I have a lot of experts that can help you in, from legal teams to trainers to different people who are here to actually help you advance this movement. We do have fact sheets. I don't have many with me, but we do have fact sheets, posters you can put up in your hotel rooms, your restaurants, your, wherever you may be doing business. So again, quite a bit of work there. So we know, we are the solution and the end of slavery. This is part of the beginning. So today I ask you to pledge your support on this fight. I ask you to take action on behalf of victims worldwide. Today, I speak for those without a voice, millions of children who are trapped in this industry, who cannot be here in the stage giving you the presentation. But in the hidden view, they're being abused and tortured and held in cages and things that we don't even want to think about. So today, as you take action, think about the one child that you could rescue him, and the way you do it is by taking proactive steps. So we do have a campaign called Adopt the Seal. You can go adopttheseal.org. You can go there and make a pledge saying, I'm just committed to this issue. That's the first step. Once we have that, then we move together forward, right? And bringing in the solution. And by your actions today, I believe you have the power to change the system. You have the ability, you have the influence, you have the skill set to do something about it. So as former victims, we need that, but not just as former victims, but as a society, we need to safeguard our children, the things that are under our influence, and more importantly, stand up for what is right, and to stand up and work with putting human rights issues and policies in place. So with that, I would like to call Sandra up. Great, thank you. Okay, do you want this?
So first off, please, let's show some appreciation to Rani Hong. I had to put my glasses on because I had to see. I couldn't see everybody in there, but excuse me just a second. I just wanted to visit with you for just a second because I am really hopeful and actually almost pleading that you see me in you. I met Ronnie several years ago when our local Rotary group brought her in to speak, as well as Elizabeth Smart. Remember the young girl that was a victim stolen from her bedroom? Ronnie was very gracious in not mentioning which hotel that was that young girl was trafficked from. But I knew in the audience it had to be mine. So hearing Ronnie tell the story of this poor victim and how I knew I could have walked past her in my hallway, that I could have been at the front desk when she checked in, that I could have been there when the traffickers took her out, just absolutely broke my heart. So I feel fortunate today. I'm empowered to do something through the Education Foundation, but I hope you feel that same empowerment and that you are inspired to take action. So any way you want to take action, please contact the Education Foundation and we will engage you in it. Right now, I'd like to welcome Glen Houseman back up to the stage. Come on, Glen. Thank you very much. We're going to do some questions and answers. Glen's going to lead that with us with Ronnie. but your questions too, please. So feel free to engage with us and stay connected. We need you.
Great, thank you. I want to thank all of you for listening, and Ronnie for sharing such an incredible story. And before we open it up for questions, I just wanted to speak maybe for a couple of minutes for you. And I do want to let you know that this part of the session is actually being recorded for my No Vacancy podcast, so we'll be able to review it, everything we talk about here today that gives you practical, actionable insight will be able to be recorded. So if you want to get on that mailing list, again, text 66866 with the word hotel. You'll be on the mailing list, and then you'll be able to get this session. So enough for the plugs. I got to tell you, I've been in this business now for 20 plus years, and this may be the hardest conversation I've ever had in this business, but it's a conversation that needs to be done and needs to be had, right? But I got to first say I'm amazed at the person you have become and that you've overcome so much. How do you go from a place of such horror to being an inspiration to everybody in the world to try to drive this forward?
Right. First of all, it is, can you imagine, very difficult.
It's difficult for me just to hear it, let alone to think about living it.
Well, and it's one thing, and so as a victim, as that 7-year-old child, often now as an adult, I go back to that. It's like, oh my goodness, how could this happen to a 7-year-old child? And yes, very difficult to hear some more. I didn't go into details more in depth, but difficult to hear what we did here, right? We all need to admit that, we all know it. And so for me, as myself, very difficult. However, there was a circumstance in my life that when I traveled back to India, by the way, what I did, I traveled back to India after 21 years and miraculously found my birth mother from a hotel. I forgot that portion of the story, so there is good news there, there is hope. But I would go back to India, and as I tried, and I went visit a shelter. I listened to a young woman tell me her story, and she told me, nobody ever hears my story. Nobody lets me discuss what it is. And she wanted to be empowered.
Right.
So from that day forward, I knew I myself as an individual can do one thing. And I told her, and I made a promise to her, I will carry your voice throughout the world. I will remember you, I will remember your story, and I will carry your voice so others might hear your plea. So that, to me, it inspires me that I'm not alone, first of all. I'm not alone.
Right.
It inspires me. There are a million. We know the numbers of 40 million. So those are very much, but again, I think every day it's a choice, as we all need to make choices in life, and we all make choice in how to overcome our obstacles and how do we overcome our challenges. And so that is a daily thing that I must do. But in the end, I see the vision, the goal I want. And as long as I keep at that focus, that helps me.
I bet that brings you a lot of peace to know that you've made real difference in people's lives too.
It does give me very much of a peace to saying, there is change. But I think what's more, it's on and off, right? One day you're like, oh my goodness, this thing is not moving forward. The next day, past the 193 countries voted on a World Day Against Trafficking in Persons, which I launched a few years ago. So every July 30th is the day that we celebrate. I went before the UN General Assembly and said, I just need one day to give a voice to victims. And 193 countries voted yes, give that day. So every year, July 30th, in fact, this is one thing we can talk about, maybe plan for the next July 30th. How can you as an association do something to raise awareness on that day? So when I see those successes, it inspires me, okay, go to the next day, go to the next event, and do education.
Right.
But when I see action within a certain industry and I see the success of it, that is what inspires me. And then when I see a woman or child being changed and rescued, that also inspires me to go. Continue.
Right, I bet it does, and I bet it adds an extra level of meaning to what you went through to be able to help all of these other people and give you that drive that you need.
Yes, I have met with many victims around the world.
Right.
Again, as I traveled, I listened to their stories. I traveled, running a shelter of my own. But hearing the voice of those, and when you really get to know them, and they are just regular young people.
Right.
And they would tell me these horrific stories, but yet I knew there could be a change that could happen. And everyone has a different story, right? It's not a cookie cutter kind of thing that's one story fits all. Every individual former victim has their own story and very powerful story. And so how That's why I say today, I speak for those without a voice, representing the millions who don't have that voice.
What strikes me is people just probably don't believe that something like this is happening, number one, here in the United States, and number two, in Washington, and possibly in your own hotel, like she had that experience over there. So I feel that there must be a lot of recognition that this is absolutely a real issue, and then when you see something, it could actually be something. How do we get people over that hump of their own internal disbelief that this could be happening right under their own noses, and then to take action without fear that they're making some terrible mistake and misreading the situation?
Right, absolutely. I've identified a big challenge we have, right? We all have that challenge, and oftentimes, especially here in our culture here, thinking, okay, it's an overseas problem, it happens over there, it doesn't happen here. However, when I did a video for Washington State, and very specifically will show you the routes that is happening right here in our state, right here in the Seattle, Everett area. And so, one, I think we just need to stop and admit there's a problem.
Right.
That to me is a huge progress, right? And I am starting to see big companies and CEOs stand and make a commitment saying, yes, this is an issue in my realm of influence. However, I'm going to take that action. I'm going to put policies in place. I'm going to put codes of conduct that says zero tolerance for modern day slavery. I'm going to be doing things that we've put in the Freedom Seal as a criteria. So we've come a long ways. Again, 18 years ago, this was a taboo subject, not talked about. Today, this is like one of the major issues in our time. In the 21st century, we're talking about trading of human beings.
Right. I mean, again, absolutely shocking to me. And one of the things that I'm having a hard time understanding is you obviously have been through it, so you have an extra sense towards these situations. And you mentioned the situation that you had in Romania with that waitress who's ultimately very timid. I think that if I was just in a hotel, and a nice high-end quality hotel, it wouldn't even come into my frame of reference to even think that. And I think that's another area that needs to be changed. So how do you interpret the signs of somebody who's being timid or shy, or may be serving you as someone who's just not, I would think maybe they're just a disconnected person that's not interested in serving, as opposed to somebody who's going through a profound life crisis.
Right. So to go back to my story in Romania, I mean, that totally took me off guard, obviously, as I landed there. But I was with a group of women, probably 10 women who was with me, and we're all at the restaurant, right? And I'm the only one saying, wait, something's not right. The 9 others didn't see anything wrong. And so I'm starting to say things, but of course, my own experience and working on this, I can identify fairly easy what's going on.
Of course.
But the 9 others didn't. And so as I was talking and I was trying to figure this out, I was educating my own team, right? Educating them, and started to saying, and we were there probably a week or so, and by end of that week, these women were all trained on this issue. And at the end of the day, they would go back to the restaurant like, oh my goodness, she's right, look at this. Why is there a limousine coming across, dropping off 2 people, and they're going up to the restaurant? And not just one instant, but happening every 30 minutes. Something is going on there, right? Even at the high levels, using the location.
Right.
So I think that is where absolutely is being able to educate the people around us, in our own hometown.
Right. I think that the next big issue is really that, at least for me, and maybe we all kind of think this way, or maybe we don't, that we only think that this is happening at some cheap, unbranded roadside hotel, and not a 3, 4, or 5-star type of property. How can we better recognize that this is a problem that could potentially happen in any hotel?
Absolutely, and that's the key.
Yeah.
It could happen anywhere, any nation, any place, right? So we're not just putting it in a box. And amazingly, we are finding trafficking victims and trafficking situations, 5-star, 4-star hotels. That's why, and again, I want to mention some names here, but pretty big brands, probably represented in this room, are taking very active role. But I think that's where we think often it's these little hotels where nobody's watching. Yes, it occurs there, absolutely, and the way it happens is different than how it's happening in the 5-star hotel.
Right.
But you see the numbers coming through the 5-star, 4-star hotels, restaurants, and these facilities. It is astonishing that this is still happening.
It really is, and to me, that's just a huge wake-up moment right now. So are there any obvious signs that you might be able to pick up on to identify the problem before you start to probe a little bit deeper?
Yeah, and so I think, again, I come back to the receptionist, but there's also, if your staff, your employees probably see and hear a lot of other things, right?
Right.
We don't always know. And believe, this is why you want to take action, because there are actual tools being given to staff, employees, to be able to report incidences. So this is why we as an industry need to be on top of this thing and be proactive before something else happens.
Right.
But there are tools now being given to staff, employees, to able to identify somebody walking down the hallway, right? What's different, what's not, and you're not going to just go up and accuse them, right? Hey, that's what's going on.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I would think, I don't know how comfortable I would be, because what if I'm wrong, and what if my employer then is angry about that?
Yeah, and that's a very real, right? That's a real thing that could happen. So I think we need to be, again, that's why we need to put the tools at the management level. If the managers are trained and they got the tools to be empowered to change, then they're going to be much more happier and easier to work with their employees and staff, right? So when a staff member comes, okay, we listen, we take into every situation, and then we find out, is there something here that we didn't see? Do we go back to the registration, and is there clues there? So there are things and analytics and things like that that are now we're able to help you to identify the number of potential risks of human trafficking within your facility.
At what point do you move it beyond a hunch into involving law enforcement?
Yeah, first of all, I think we're all adults here. I speak at high school, but don't ever confront right there, right? You take it to management, you take it to law enforcement. Law enforcement is there to help as the best they can. We're training them as well. But I think that the point is, if something isn't right, just go and talk to your manager, to your boss. At least you did your part. If they decide not to listen, that's something they need to live with. But at least I did what I could to voice my opinion and to bring this to the forefront.
Right. So what are some of those signs that you think that are more obvious that we could pick up on in the hotel experience? You say walking down the hall and seeing somebody. So what am I seeing that's going to trigger that first reaction that previously I may have initially discounted, but now I need to pay a little bit more attention to?
And so just using my example, I was sitting in the foyer of the hotel in Romania, okay? Just talking with some people and things. And I saw this happening. I mean, I would see the limos and I see these cars, very rich cars, coming in, dropping off some girls and such. I would see that and I think, okay, well, different. I'm in a different country, I'm in a different culture, I don't know. But as I had sitting there having conversation, over time and time again, that was happening. So I knew, wait, this is just very unusual. You know when things are unusual and you question it. You do question it, and for me, I was able to, at first I didn't identify it, right? But it was through these patterns of I see over and over again, then I start realizing, wait, there are certain things and way people are being brought in and where they're going. And all of them went right to the restaurant, and what I didn't tell you, there was an office right next to the restaurant, so the people would come into the office and sign in. And I'm going, that's unusual, we don't really do that here. And I'm coming from the American culture of, I haven't seen that. So that was different, but then time after time, why they keep reporting to this man behind a desk at the office, and then once they did that, then they could go into the restaurant to have food. So there was a clue. Right. So that's when I started asking, just curious, what was that all about?
Do you think it's harder for people to identify when a boy or a man is in that situation as opposed to a female victim, because we may just discount that something could be happening this to a male more easily?
Yeah, no, great question, and I didn't really address the gender issue. And so, I would think it might be easier to identify the woman and the girl.
Right.
However, there need to be much more education on, especially when it comes to the hospitality industry, there are a lot of male that are being trapped in this industry. And so I think we do need to do a shift in being able to recognize both genders. However, we seem to think, it is more women and girls statistically, but I think it's because the male numbers are not being reported.
Right.
Again, numbers are numbers, and we do the best, and we come out with these numbers, but again, we got to look at these.
Right, because if something is hidden below layers that we're not focused on, then we don't even know what to track in order to create accurate numbers from that.
Right.
Right.
And so I think this is where and in, I think 2004 or so, I worked with the US government, US Department of Health and Human Resources, and we launched we launched a campaign, a USA campaign, hidden beneath, look beneath the surface. And that was just a social campaign, but that really helped to really bring that issue forward and to be then gave actual steps to identify.
Excellent. I think this might be a good time to open it up for questions. So anyone have a question out there that they'd like to ask? Obviously, it seems like we could talk about anything at this point. No? I'm sure someone has a question. There's a lot of smart people out here that want to do the right thing. No? Yep. Thank you, sir. Here comes a microphone for you. Please speak in that so we can hear you.
Tony. So in Washington, people who are, I guess, in the hotel industry, we have to be careful that we're not employing ever anybody that's, comes to us through some other. I think most of us have pretty good safeguards in place for that. And then there's the whole supply chain. Are we buying products from people who are, potentially being forced into labor? But more importantly, how are people being used in Washington State? Is it the sex industry? Is it agriculture? Where are people really getting used? We can obviously play a role in trying to stop the transfer of people, but I'm not sure. I think that's probably the most common intersection of where we end up interacting with this, because I don't think most of us are hiring them. So I'm just trying to understand where we can make the biggest impact. Being aware of it is great. By the way, we've done training at our hotel looking for this, but I'm just trying to figure out where this is actually happening, where people are getting used.
Right. So right here, specifically in Washington State, one, we know we are a border to an international border. We know we're close to the proximity of the waterways. And so those are two escape routes, you might say, and then people coming in. So we have both sex trafficking and forced labor. The sex trafficking is much easier to identify, and we hear about it, and we're able to see rescues and things like that. But at the same time, forced labor is thriving in our state. One example is, let me put it away, workers are being brought here, whether being brought into Washington State or workers within Washington, and they are taken to remote places throughout Washington State, Shelton, which is more towards Olympia, Eastern Washington, and they are being put in these like mobile homes. So they get an employment contract. They get an employment contract to work somewhere, but then outside of that employment contract, they're taken to isolation places within our state. Sex trafficking and forced labor occurs at the same time, and there's camps that this is occurring. So maybe you say, okay, that doesn't matter to me as much because I'm the hotel. And so, but I think we got to look at where are we located. Location, if you're in Seattle, you're going to see a lot of sex trafficking. But when you start looking in the forced labor, when the products that we have in our hotels, a lot of those things are tainted by or made by slaves in a foreign country. And again, tools to be able to help you track that stuff. Right. So it happens in both ways. I think we are not different than any of the other states, but we are close to those two escape routes. What we need to look at specifically, I go more detail on the transit and the routes that the victims are coming in. And a lot of your place is a point of meeting. The hotels, the airports, the restaurants are a point of contact, first point of contact to meet the victim. Once they meet there, then, just like in the story, then they take them to wherever they are in Washington State. So I think that's where we need to be. You are in the front lines, and you're, first one in contact. And you may not necessarily, this takes a lot of training, right, to be able to identify that. So you may not be able to identify that at first, but once you start seeing again and you're getting more training and more specific training, education, I think these are things that you're aware of. And then after a few times, you're like, oh my goodness, okay, this is something that may needs more investigations.
Right.
But it absolutely happens here in our state. What we did through research, through the task force, I believe was several counties in Washington state are affected by human trafficking. We know those numbers, and they're difficult to get, and then we also know about garages, businesses now opening up in garages of people's homes. You wouldn't think anything of it, but there was one instance that King 5 covered that workers are being brought and they were kept in the garage to make the linens, linen stuff. And then guess who they're selling it to is people within Washington state.
Right.
So those are things we look at.
That brings up two issues for me that I think warrants a little bit deeper dive. Number one is the supply chain. I know a lot of hoteliers out there are very focused, for example, on environmental issues and ethical issues, and aren't just worried about, like what I said yesterday about the towel in the room and not washing it, but actually understanding how that towel might be made, where it comes from, that factory that it actually comes from, and understanding who is making those products within the factory. So I think maybe what we're talking about here is when these folks are making contracts with suppliers, they get a better understanding on where the product is being made and who is making those particular products, right?
And that's not easy, right? It's not easy to identify.
It's becoming
However,
easier because the good conscience companies are doing the work already, so there should be certain mechanisms in place when you're dealing with certain companies. And perhaps you urge companies that aren't doing it to get a better idea of where their supply chain is, to give you as the hotelier a sense of comfort and peace when you're buying their products.
And that's where the Freedom Seal comes in, because again, we're giving very specific criteria, very actionable things that you can do.
Right.
And yes, you start looking at the contracts that you have with suppliers. Who are they? Are they ethical suppliers? Where are they getting? And it takes a little bit of homework, right? It's not just something that's seen. And to the point that this is becoming such an issue that I think we have about 7 countries who have passed laws on regulations on this, because so it's just a matter of time that businesses have to, by law, step up to the plate and start showing concrete action. I know, again, I work a lot in the UK, and the UK Modern Slavery Act absolutely outlines all of this stuff.
Right.
So we're seeing a lot of businesses really taking proactive steps.
Excellent. And I think it's probably something that's going to be driven more by business than government.
Absolutely, and that is why I'm here, because I want it to be driven by businesses, right? Because you know how this works, you're in it every day, and it's often governments are trying to put these restrictions and guidelines, but they're not always on the ground. So we, as a society, we rather have the association, the businesses drive this leadership. That is my first ask.
Right.
Once we do that, then everything else is, versus having it the other way around, it just doesn't, it's not as effective.
So how can we better identify, for example, prostitution that might be taking place in a property and how that connects to illegal sex trafficking?
Yeah, and I think that's where I believe there has been a lot of education here through the association. Again, easy way one was with the hotel again, looking the signs that I had mentioned before, looking for those signs. I think, again, one of the top employees is that reception desk. That reception desk receives a lot of data, receives a lot of information. So really getting them trained to identify and know who to report to, know what to do is something that we absolutely need to equip.
That's a pretty big responsibility for someone who may be a college student working at 2 in the morning, for example.
And that's a good point, because a lot of the trafficking, now in the sex trafficking, prostitution, I know best came out with a statistic, 2 p.m. in the afternoons where a lot of the sex trafficking is happening within the industry. 2 p.m. in the afternoon when people are working, because a lot of it is, 2 weeks ago I back at another event at the United Nations, trade in minors. And we went very specifically trade in minors in the digital age. And so that's all to do with, sex trafficking.
Right.
But that's where your training will help, and it's easier to identify, but it's not always easy to report it. And sometimes when you do report it, it doesn't move forward, but doesn't mean you don't need to report it. I think what we need to do one of the biggest gap is data, right? Collecting the data, what type of statistics, what kind of trafficking, what kind of circumstances happened.
Right.
Getting that kind of data will really be helpful in moving this forward.
Right. All right, I think we have time for one more question, should there be one in the audience. I know you're so eager before. We have one more? All right, run, Tony, run.
What information do you have about the transit patterns in eastern Washington? I mean, we've got people here from Ellensburg and Spokane and Moses Lake and everything like that. Are those hotels also a big factor in this? Is that something we need to watch for? Are people being moved through Washington into nearby states?
So I live in Washington State, and I often, first thing is Seattle. I think of Seattle. However, what we know from reports, what we know from research, it's maybe a meeting place, but then fast, they're taken to Eastern Washington. This industry is thriving in Eastern Washington. We just don't hear about it, we don't hear the statistics, and we don't hear it in the news. However, this is why the crime flourishes in Eastern Washington. So I would need to look at, as an association, what are we doing to train the hotels in that area. I'm not sure how much has been done, but I would, if I had to guess, probably more trafficking is happening over there, out of sight, out of mind, kind of thing. And so that's where this industry thrives in profits, and because nobody's looking over there. So that is why one of the reasons why I am working more and focused specifically on the forced labor issue is just unreported. However, we do know it is absolutely happening there, and we have cases and work on that.
Excellent. So again, if you want to hear this interview again, just text the word hotel to 66866. And as we wrap up, I would love for you to give us that call to action. How can people get more information, not just for folks in this room, but for people who are going to listen to this subsequently, to become involved so they can help make a difference?
Yes, one way can do online. Again, online, Adopt the Seal. Adopttheseal.org will give you an area to make a pledge to take action. That is one. Two, training. If you have not done training within your industry and within a hotel, I encourage you to do so. Again, locally, the association is doing that. On the corporate level, we are bringing in corporate training to the big brand names, which gives very much more half a day to a day training specifically. So two, do that. Number three, I think able to just, if you can make a commitment, again, just a commitment to doing the right thing, commitment to take action, pledge, adopt the seal, the Freedom Seal is a component, and that really is a tool to really help you to do this. It's not just research and all this kind of stuff. This is actual practical things that I created to help businesses do the right thing. So from monitoring your supply chain to monitoring places that you may get in contact. Again, there are a lot of tools out there, and we can bring that to your situation to be able to help identify and forced labor, more likely prevent it and be proactive versus reactive.
Excellent. I love it. Ronnie, I mean, what can I say? You are an absolutely amazing person again, and an inspiration to us all. And thank you for shining such a bright light on this subject and helping to make a difference. Let's hear it for Rani Hong. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's terrific. Appreciate it.
Thanks.